You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Hey, I want to let you in on something. I have white friends. Some of my best friends are white. Hell, some of my best employees are white. Can I say that on the air? It's my podcast. I can say it, can I? Hey, listen, my entire life I've been asked, hey, Alex, what do you think about this situation? And it's always a black situation. It's about a black candidate. It's about a black employee. It's about a black issue. But you know what? I want to know sometimes what white people are thinking. I want to ask them. I want to be the white whisperer. I want to be able to say things to white people and ask white people questions so that we can really continue this dialogue and this discussion, because I think we have too little of it. I think we have our sound bites and we stand behind our microphones and we throw and hurl things at each other, but we don't really dialogue. But at the Black Like Me podcast studios, we want to talk. So I have two guests today. One is Jeremy Holiday. He's a filmmaker. He's a husband. He's a dad. He's also my engineer. So he's in the studio with me each week. So sometimes if you hear me making crazy comments to someone at the board, it's Jeremy. And we're going to talk about his son, Sam, and a question or comment that Sam made one day while Jeremy was reading him a book before bedtime. I'm going to just call that segment Things White People Want to Know. And that's not bad. I know in some places, people may think, you can't say that. White people don't have the right to ask you questions. You can't speak for all black people. Well, I don't think Jeremy's in the studios for me to speak for all black people. I'll speak for a couple of million of them, not all of them, but just, I just want to let people know that it's really okay. It's really, really okay. And if you go to our Facebook page, Dr. Alex G, you can even write some things that you as a white person or might want to know, and just use hashtag Black Like Me. And after that, I'm going to have Tyler Nylen in the studio for a segment I'm kicking off that's called Work That White. I met Tyler when he was a grad student. He interned with us as he was finishing graduate school. He trained at a seminary here in the Midwest. And part of my challenge to him comes from this scene towards the end of the movie, A Time to Kill, when Samuel L. Jackson was trying to really get his attorney, Matthew McConaughey, up to speed and saying, this is what you got to do with the jury. You got to get at their hearts. It was an all-white jury. And Matthew McConaughey said, who's going to help a white jury do that? And to which Samuel L. Jackson says, well, that's why I hired you. And so this whole concept that he knew exactly why he was working with someone white, because he knew that there were things he could say and things that he could do that as a black man that he couldn't. And that's not why I hired Tyler to do those things. But it's very interesting. That's just to talk to him about his perspective on things and how he takes his cues and even clues by working in this cross-cultural work to think about how he becomes an advocate for the work by speaking very honestly with his white colleagues. And so sometimes we'll be having a discussion and he'll want to know how to work out a situation, and I'll give him a couple of pointers and I'll say, hey, now go work that white, or go use that experience. If you use that white privilege for good, then, some good can happen. And so I'm excited about this segment. It's going to be real exciting. It's going to be fun, but it's going to be a lot of truth in it. And so thank you for tuning in to Black Like Me with Dr. G. And Jeremy, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Before
we get into things white people want to know, just take me back. How did we meet? How did you become familiar with my work? And take me back to the first time we met in my office.
Right after you published the Justified Anger article, I emailed your office because I had completed a couple years before this film called Multico, which was about this multiracial performing theater group at West High School.
Sure, I've heard of them.
And I was like, hey, I'm interested in race and stuff, and I live in Madison, and whoever your secretary was at the time was like, oh, sure, we'll get back to you, and it never really happened.
Wow, that was you?
That was me. So I had been wanting to get involved no, it's totally fine. Very busy, a lot of stuff going on. And years passed, and then when the opportunity came up with Jake, our mutual friend who had taken your history class, and said, I think I can get us a meeting with Dr. G because it was on doing something with him, is what I wrote on my card at the end of the history class. I said, awesome. And so we went
and you put the two and two together, so you knew that the guy you
oh
wrote
yeah,
didn't
no,
write
I mean
you
I've
back.
been following you since that article. I mean
That explains a little bit of the hostility that I've been sensing between us two, Jeremy. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. Please go ahead. This is interesting.
I mean, when you wrote the article, and the big town meeting that sort of followed it, I was like, somebody's actually talking about this for real, for the first time in my life in Madison, and I was like, this is where it's happening, and I need to be in that room. I want to be with those people.
Were you in the room?
I was not there. I had not yet moved back into town. I was, and so I was following it from afar a little bit.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was just really clear to me that of all the talk about race and whatnot, or changing things, this was the first time there was a conversation that included black people and white people. It was in a church. It was about an incident, about profiling and about an individual who was wronged. And I thought, like, if something is going to happen in my time in Madison, it's going to be part of this organization. So, I mean, I don't know. I've always considered myself some manner of infiltrator, right? So,
ooh,
and so it's like when I want to make films. I wanted to make films when I was in film school, but my skill was not in filmmaking. My skill was initially in computers and technology, because I was good with computers. So like that was my foray. I was like, people need help. I'm like, I can do. I used to do technical theater. I do stuff with computers. I can do audio. I can do all that stuff. And so that was how I would get in the door. And then once I'm in the door, and if you're in any creative situation, like here in the studio, and we talk about creative choices, which is what I'm really interested in, right? I used to work at a high school, and I was in their IT department. And when I was interviewing there, they said, "Well, what would be your ideal job?" And I was like, "An English teacher," which is what I really want to be. But I'm happy to take care of your computers and work my way up.
Right.
And so, there was this opportunity to get involved in the organization through a film and through Jake. And that was, almost a year ago, and here we are talking.
Wow,
in the
and
studio.
here you are. You're my engineer.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I am going to get back to that email. So I want you to know that I'm going to write you back. It's just been a whole lot. Yeah, these emails have been piling up over the last 5 years, but I am going to write you back, and you're going to. No, that's very interesting. I'm intrigued by the fact that you listened to this out of town. You had not moved back to the area.
No, I was planning to. I mean,
got you.
And I was going to be back here. I mean, I moved back just a month or two after that happened. But
that's really interesting. I realized a couple of things at that town hall meeting that took place a little over 4 years ago, is that a number of things. People do want to talk about race and have a real talk, but then there are those who don't really want to have the real talk about race. They want to check it off, and they want to move it ahead, just move ahead on the agenda. But then I'm also realizing that there are a group of people who don't know what they don't know and aren't sure of what they do know. So they like learning information, like with the history class, or just sitting around where people are talking about race, because I feel that there's a sense we have not really broken the surface. There's a bit of agreed upon silence, and we'll talk about it and we'll push the envelope only so much, but not really get into where it's dirty and messy and feelings are on the table. And you get to the place where people can really begin to talk about their true fears, what they're really dreading, so that they can move ahead towards some real relationships. And I'm wondering if that's what you were hearing in the letter and things that I was writing, that I was trying to really provoke people to say what they're really thinking by saying what I was really thinking.
I think that's true. I mean, one of the things that I grew up in the 90s, and one of the things that I hated, my growing up in the 90s was political correctness. And I was, my dad was a coal miner. We were solid blue Democrats for a long time. And that was the party of labor. That was the party of the work. It was in Western Pennsylvania, where I grew up for a long, long time. And so the political correctness is a liberal idea. And at the heart of it, I think, was like respect for individuals.
Sure.
But what it meant in my lifetime was that we went from being able to talk about stuff in the public sphere to not being able to talk about stuff. And there was there's somehow that initial respect just turns into like covering up stuff with like language that just is not true. And I hated that. I mean, I've always had this fierce commitment to the truth. I'm like, I want to know what it is. And just because, because essentially, and it creates this environment where like you can be completely racist in what you do, but if you don't say a few key words, you're fine.
It's interesting, Jeremy. I've often said in this community, I'm around white people all the time who make sure that they call me African American, but they treat me like the N-word. And for me, if you're thinking it, just say it and act like, but let's not pretend like we're friends and cool, but the way you demean me or the way you say things prove that you don't really respect don't really respect me or my thought or my challenges. I've been asked during my work in this community, what do I say to my opponents? First of all, it's like I thought my opponents were like drug addiction, mass incarceration. I didn't know that it was I didn't realize it was like people. What do you say to your opponents who think you have too much power? To which I responded, "Ooh, that's an interesting concept. I thought we were all about getting the disenfranchised a little bit more power in this community and in our nation, so that when it appears that a brother has some power because he can speak his mind and not worry about offending the hand that feeds him, that all of a sudden he becomes a threat and he has too much power. And what happens when someone becomes too much power? They become a target. You want to take them down. You want to take that power away. You want to further disenfranchise them. But in a community where it is so right and expected to be PC, you can actually say to a black man, what do you say to people who think you have too much power? I don't own the press. I'm not rich, but I'm perceived as a threat because I won't stop being angry. I won't change the name of anger, and in the name of our movement, Justified Anger. So I'm tracking with you in what you say about wanting to have this commitment to the truth, because I think the closer we get to saying those real things, the more pushback we feel. A couple of years ago, after a few colleagues and myself were contacted by national media. It was right after a young man was shot by the police officers in the town where I live. And a lot of attention was on our city because it wasn't too far away from the Ferguson incident. And so I started getting calls from Al Jazeera, Greta Van Susteren, I think I'm saying her name right. She's from Green Bay. Other people, what do you think? Do you think your city's going to go up in flames? Blah, blah, blah. So a few of us were being contacted by these folks. Someone called a citywide meeting, and all the civic leaders, most of the civic leaders of the community was there. The mayor, the county executive, the head of United Way, head of police department, head of the school department, head of the major foundations, head of the chamber, head of Urban League, Boys and Girls Club. I mean, I'm naming this just to show you the who's who of the civic world, whether you're in Madison or whether you're in Tulsa, no matter where you're, these are the leaders.
Any city,
Man, if a bomb had dropped on that place, we would have lost 3/5 of our civic leaders in the community. The agenda was not marring Madison's reputation nationally. I was told in this meeting of my peers. Now, granted, a few months before that, a report had come out called The Race to Equity, stating that we have the worst disparity between blacks and whites in the entire nation. We have the worst disparity. This is back in 2013. We didn't get these civic leaders to talk about how did we get here and how do we move away from it. It was about messaging.
Yeah.
It felt like a slap on the wrist. There were only 2 or 3 people in that room talking to national media. So when people start saying, well, we know that there have been some discussion of people talking to national media, they basically said, this entity said, it is our role to describe Madison publicly. And so leave that to us. So basically, when these media outlets come to you, either say nothing or refer them to this other entity. But I was basically told that I didn't have the right to talk about my experiences in my town, where I pay taxes, where I own a home, where I was educated, where I'm raising my family, where I try to lead and help the community. I was told that that's not your job. Your job is not to comment on Madison. So I guess I'm just supposed to get back in the fields and just, take care of, chopping cotton. I don't know if he thought I was going to say, yes, sir, boss. Let me go back to I know what my place is. I'm from here. That person's not even from Madison. But it's interesting. We want to worry about being PC. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. We want to try to control the messaging because it might reveal who we really are.
Yeah, I didn't grow up in Madison, but I've lived here about 10 years off and on. And one of the ways I describe it to people who aren't from here is like Madison is a small town or like a medium-sized city that has big city problems, but doesn't want to treat itself like a city. It's like, well, we're not Milwaukee. We're not Chicago. We're just Madison. And I think that always prevents it from really engaging with these problems. I mean, like saying like, oh, like let's take the race to equity report and look at it and say, okay, like how many individuals are we talking about? Like we can solve this problem. Like we know these people. It's not like a sprawling city of millions. Right. It's several 100,000. And And the PC bit for me, it's like, so this is the counterpoint for me, and that is like in the 90s, there were like the things that as a teenager I grew up on hearing in the news were like Ebonics, rap video stars,
right?
And like people of color. It's like they're not black people anymore. They're people of color,
right?
And like white people, like notice you may not know any, but if you encounter them, like they are no longer black people. They're people of color, or even like like a person of color,
right?
And at the time, I literally had no understanding of why that mattered. I was like black person who's black. Does not make a difference to me. This is semantic.
Right.
But it was actually like hearing you talk about. Like when we talked about my son Sam, and you talked about because we connected as like your father and I'm a father,
right,
and it wasn't like the primary connection was like I'm white, you're black,
right.
Where I was like, oh, like there's a whole bit, just like as white folks, where like you look at, it's like what thing do you choose is the one thing to identify a person as? Like are they a father like you? Are they a coworker?
Right,
are they,
right. What do you have in common?
Right. And when you talk about race first, like that means humanity is second.
Right.
Almost all the time. It's like you're a black person, like you're a black leader. And you often say, no, I'm a leader of a community and a pastor. I also happen to be black.
Right.
And that difference is, I think, at the heart of what the discussion about political correctness started as, but it did not end that way.
No.
And the thing that like is a sad truth for I think all of us liberals around the world is a fact that Michelle Alexander lays out in the new Jim Crow, which was that under Clinton, it was worse. It was worse than Nixon. It was worse than Reagan.
Yes.
Like three
Jerome
strikes.
Dillard was just on my show a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and he says the same thing.
I mean, 3 strikes and you're out, 1 strike and you're out.
Right.
That's Clinton. And that's liberals being accused of being too soft on crime and cracking down on black people across the country through the war on drugs. Like that's our shame.
Right, right.
And that's something that, and even like Ava DuVernay she talks a little bit about Clinton in 13th, and there's a clip in there of President Clinton, older President Clinton, on the campaign trail saying, "What did you want? Like those crack dealers breaking into your houses?" And I was like, I mean, she's generous with them, but I'm like, you're a crazy old man, and like most of those crack dealers were not these horrible specters that are going to come in and kill your grandma. They're like people. And and they were people that were doing drugs at the same rate as white people. Like I went to school, private little school in New England, and
we know what happens there.
We know what happens there, and they got the bros with the 2 collars and all,
It builds on the fear. Yeah. It builds on the fear of individuals. So so you're touching upon so many things, Jeremy, that makes this podcast exciting for me because I don't think people have these real discussions. Yeah. And so, I've got this segment that I've created that's called Things White People Want to Know. And in fact, you and I had a real good conversation about your son, Sam, and you had some real questions about that. And I actually want to play that segment so that folks who are listening to the podcast can hear, because what we want to model here is that it's okay to ask questions. There are some people who wouldn't ask me my perspective on things because, well, I don't want him to think that I think he's black. I don't want to talk to someone because I don't want them to think I'm saying hello because they're black. I said, well, what's worse? Having them think you're doing it because they're black, or you're ignoring them because they're black. So if you see someone, ask the question. So I want to show folks that I'm trying to address some of these questions because I think in being able to talk honestly with each other, it brings us a little bit closer. So can you play that clip for just a minute?
Yep. So I have 2 boy children, a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I try to do my best to talk to them honestly about things in the world. I don't want to scare them with stuff, but I also try to tell them the truth.
Right.
Which means that we have talked about some race stuff in our family before. And so the other night, maybe 3 or 4 nights ago, I'm reading this Star Wars The Force Awakens visual dictionary, which is an awesome book. It has pictures of all the starfighters and the people and the characters and stuff. And we come across a picture of Finn, a character played by an African-American actor. It's not a part of the Star Wars world, like race does not seem to matter there all that much.
Okay.
But he looks at it and he says, "Oh, like I'm glad, Finn's really lucky that he doesn't live in our world." And I said, "Why is that?" And he's like, "Well, because they treat black people really badly in our world," which is something that I have told him. Like I have said,
sure.
African American people that look like that, black people have been treated poorly in the United States for a long time. They used to be slaves. There's this whole business. But when he asked me the question, I was just taken aback, and I was like, oh, like on one hand, I'm glad that he is not growing up the way I did, where I didn't know anything about racism for real, more than like it was like the black people were treated badly, and then civil rights, and then boom, we're done.
Right,
and also Obama,
we shall overcome.
Right, yeah, and they did.
Yes,
they did
yes.
overcome. And they just needed to be, hosed and shot and whatever.
That's
and
right, just building character.
Yeah, it just built a character. But on the other hand, I could tell that he understood that being a black was not good in some sense. And I was like, I don't want to tell him that either. And I said, some black people get treated badly in our country, but it's okay for other people. And what I realized was like, I had all of a sudden like exhausted all of my like knowledge to tell him. And
wow, sure.
And I was like, at that exact moment, I was like, I'm going to be seeing Alex on Wednesday. I will ask him there. Cause I also realized that like, if I were to just continue to talk to him, I would just kind of go on the same trajectory, and I needed more info, and I needed to think more about like, what does it mean to talk to what is the 5-year-old elevator speech version of that, answer to that question. So
wow. First of all, I think that it's cool and to be lauded that you're having these very real talks with your sons, because that's a tough talk to have. But on the flip side, my mom had to talk to me about race when I was 5 because I looked like Finn and people were treating me a particular way, or even when they weren't, because my mom came up in the 50s and 60s. She wanted to shield me by saying, sometimes you might be treated this way because. So it's interesting to hear that my white colleagues are beginning to have the talk as well. In terms of what that elevator speech is, that's a great question. I need to think about that. Yeah. But your question brings up a very important point. So I want to offer an insight, then sort of come back to what might be some suggestions. I think what we're realizing is that when you have a community with extreme racial disparity, that anyone who looks like Finn or who looks like me is considered at risk. So your son makes a very curious observation, because even though I have a college degree, I consider myself middle class, I'm a homeowner, my mom has a degree, my wife and I do, my daughter's in college, it doesn't mean that I'm not at risk, because the perception is, I might need something, I might be suspicious. It's why someone will still follow me in stores or ask me 2 or 3 times if I need help with something, or may ask my white assistant, are you Dr. G? Assuming that I'm the assistant or the driver or whatever. So it's interesting that even when there's greater accessibility, there's still perceptions that have not caught up with my own accessibility. And so the crisis that my white friends are finding is that when there's just horrific racial disparity, their children are now being raised in a scenario where they're connecting skin color and intelligence, or the lack of intelligence, or skin color and behavior. And see, that's becoming problematic, because we both know that that's not the way all black children act. So then this positions my white colleagues to begin to put pressure on schools and teachers and administrators. What are we going to do to make sure that all children have a fair chance? I mean, you go back 60 years ago, 70 years ago, when my mom was your son's age, kids didn't act like that in school. They were sharecroppers. They picked cotton before school and went to school. They were living in horrible poverty, but yet they didn't interact like that. But they had black teachers. And their teachers lived in their communities, and they saw their teachers in church on Sunday, and they saw their teachers at the general store. It was part of this whole community thing. When integration happened, so many of those black teachers were let go. They didn't just decide not to teach our kids. They pushed for integration, thinking that it would help black kids, and then 36,000 of them were fired. And so we are still scrambling to get that level of accountability, that presence, that mother figure, that father figure back in our schools. So what we have is the result of the school system not seeing the importance of having teachers of color. And so what happens is the children who are not doing well in school cannot become school teachers. And if we don't manage those classrooms better, people who have the ability to be school teachers are not going to become school teachers. But now the disparity is not just hurting black kids. It's now starting to hurt white kids. And their parents are beginning to think, well, if this school doesn't change, my kid might grow up with some very racist views. And that's got to be a very daunting and frightening thing for you.
Yeah. It is, Alex. I mean, you've probably experienced this with your own kids, probably to a greater extent. I mean, like I teach them we talk about stuff and do the best that I can, and then I realize that there's a reckoning that comes because they're figuring out the world for themselves as well.
They are.
And and I can say, I can give them my insights,
Sure.
but in some sense, like I've fought my own battles. I was just we just watched Black Panther last night. I just read.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's great. Like a little like friend of.
No,
Black
let's
person.
slow down a bit,
Okay,
and don't you dare do that Wakanda sign either. Let's just wait
No,
about that.
I did not do Wakanda Forever. But I grew up in the 90s. And like I even lived outside of Baltimore for a little bit. Like I mean, as far as I knew growing up, like the crack was about drugs. Like I had literally no conception, or no one in my life could say, there might be something else going on here.
Sure.
But they're in a different world, like, and the challenges that I had are not the same challenges that they had. And, I realized that I can't create a worldview for them. I can't be like, here's what you should think.
Sure.
And even if I could, I don't think I have that right anyway.
Right. How can you sustain it?
Yeah. And so we're sort of both figuring things out. But I just, when as good as the school as they go to, I look at it and I'm like, there are no black teachers, and it's like, there are lots of black people here, but there are no black teachers.
What's interesting, and I'm sorry not to cut you off, but the thing is, and this is sad, but I'm going to say it anyway. Sometimes these things don't change until our white friends start speaking up.
Yeah.
Black people, they expect us to say, where are the black teachers? Alex, we teach everybody. We love everybody. We let them read MLK books. But really what happens is when it starts impacting the white community, like, like the opiate crisis. When it was crack cocaine, it's like those black thugs. They're just trying to be New Jack City and they got crack, blah, blah, blah. Now it's a health crisis. It's a mental health crisis. When certain things start to impact the broader community, that's code for white, then people start thinking, we've got to begin to do something. So we need more white parents saying, this is what my son said to me. So what's going to offset that? So what's your plan for more black teachers? And what's your plan for the curriculum? What are they reading? And what do things look like? I mean, I'm reading him about, Star Wars at home, but what's he reading here? Are you reinforcing some of his assumptions? I think parents have got to begin to speak up, because school boards and school districts, I think they have their answers ready for black parents. They're not really ready for white parents to start saying, you know what, this isn't going to work for us.
Yeah.
Because we're their customers. So that means you've got other options. And I'm not trying to say, hey, leave public, I'm a product of public education. But when they're realizing that white parents have an option, and that there are some white parents who want to get away from black students because of that perception of those actions, and others just don't want their children to have it, we got to put pressure on superintendents and administrators to say, what's your plan for doing this? Because part of my child's education is that he doesn't think that this is who black people are and what black people do. And so we got to just make some noise around that.
Yeah. It's good. I mean, and I feel sad, I feel bad for like those, because I've volunteered in both of my son's classrooms for a while. Like I know, a number of the kids, and I see these, some of these young black boys, and I'm like, it's too much pressure for you to understand. I cannot expect you to like figure your whole life out at 7 and be like a good role model for all these other people. I mean, it's just too much. It's just an absurd thing for me to ask. But I'm also disappointed that that's not the case. That I'm like, okay, where's, if the teachers aren't going to teach about this most important issue, the kids learn about it in the social interactions and all this stuff,
and draw their own conclusions.
Yeah, and they come up with a worldview.
And I'm slightly older than you are, Jeremy. But what's happened is you probably were either raised in a part of the country where there wasn't a whole lot of diversity, or you were raised in a place where there's so diversity, but you were told that really doesn't matter because we're not supposed to see color because color's bad, so we don't see it. So then you have a group of people who grew up not seeing color, not thinking about it. So if people have not built cross-cultural relationships, they don't even know how to guide their kids through it. You can help your son read. You can help your son know how to go to the bathroom because these are things you do. These are things you've learned. But if they're saying, Dad, how do I approach a friend who looks different than me? Dad, how do I talk to someone who, and the parents know nothing about it. If a kid comes home, a white child comes home and says, Dad, all the brown kids eat at the same table. Why? Well, if as a parent you're white and you always eating at the white table and your table's always been white, who helps our kids? And so I think besides wanting your kids to learn how to read and do math, how to nap, how to play nice on the playground, I think parents are thinking that the schools are going to teach kids how to be non-racist and how to be cordial and how to work through racial issues. And I don't think our teachers have the bandwidth or the pay grade to do that. So that means parents are going to have to really build meaningful relationships. They're going to have to make sure that children are seeing movies, reading books that offset that. It's actually what Black parents are doing.
Yeah.
Because they want to show kids our kids the other side of our history, of our contributions, of our success, because they're not always celebrated in school. So we're having to go the extra mile to be in cultural environments. That's code. That's where Black people in sort of mid-sized college towns like ours are thinking when, I want to go to Milwaukee, or, I enjoy being in Detroit, or we're going to DC because it just felt so great to just have more Black people around. It's not like we don't want to be around white people, but there's a sense of relaxation when you see someone who looks like you being a member of Congress or running a business or owning a business. And those are things that you don't always see in communities like Madison. So I think we've got to band together more, Jeremy, and other parents to begin to put pressure and just say, you're not just addressing this issue for Black kids, you're really addressing this for all kids, because while the adults are trying to figure it out, kids are taking note. And they're making decisions right now at 5 and 6 year olds that's going to shape the way they see race and themselves in comparison to other races at a very, very early age. And I think our administrators have got to understand this, and our parents have got to understand this too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think about too, like you mentioned a bit about white parents having a choice. I used to read a bunch of Jonathan Kozol's work, and one of the things he always said is he goes to places and talks about inequality in education, and people are like, where can we give you money? And he's like, I don't want money. It's like, I want you to keep your kids in this school and use all that privilege and talent to change it for everybody. And I think, and that's, a lot of the folks, I think in my generation, the more sensitive of us have tried to operate on something like that as a principle, right?
Sure.
Like a year and a half ago, there was a small parents organization that got started at the school, and it was like there was a bunch of parents interested in change, and some of the things they were interested in was they were opting out of standardized testing. More play-based curriculum for kindergarten.
Sure.
And the achievement gap. I think you can paint the picture of what that looked like. A very nice East Side Madison home with a bunch of people that just came from their other board meetings and jobs where they wore suits. And I was there, and I was there.
Or Birkenstocks.
Yeah. There was a lot of Birkenstocks and a lot of natural wood and some hummus and kombucha, both of which I love.
Of course.
And I had, I had come from a rugby practice, so I was all sweaty, and I was already skeptical to begin with, and I was smelly, so I was already people are like, what's that guy doing? Right. And so I went to one meeting only because of this. I was like, I saw the room and we were talking about achievement gap, and I was like, okay, so cool. People here with motivation, we need to get Black parents to come and be part of this organization so we can do this together. And a woman looks over at me. And
once we planned it and organized it and got it going.
But we just need we should have Black parents here from the beginning.
Right. We should have had Black parents there.
Yeah.
I got you.
It was like, imperfect as it is, I'm like, we need some. If we're talking about achievement, we're talking about Black people. We need Black people to be a part of this actively. And a woman looks over at me and is like, well, that's just tokenism. I don't know that we need Black people to solve this problem.
But what's worse, tokenism or paternalism?
Yeah, I didn't have the answer, but I was like, I don't think you're going to
brought me to that meeting.
Anything. But I was like, you should have been there. I didn't know you then. But retroactive, I can imagine, there's just you cock your head sideways and be like, what are you doing here? How can you possibly achieve your goals when you set up this way? And at that moment, I knew I didn't have the answer, but I was like, this isn't it.
You know this isn't it.
Yeah.
In fact, some of the problems that your 5-year-old is dealing with has happened because when there have been a need or have been needs in the black community, well-intentioned white people have gotten in the room at somebody's house on the east side, on the west side, on the south side, but the black people and the black parents weren't there.
Yeah.
There's a pairing of schools in our community where you go to K through 2 and then maybe 4 through 5 or something, some kind of breakdown like that. Black parents didn't want that. We didn't want Lincoln Middle School to become Lincoln Elementary School. We wanted our kids in South Madison to have their own middle school. But there are always these enclaves of very secretive and very well-meaning gatherings of white people, and then their findings are imposed on the black community. And when you don't respond, it's because, well, you're a black parent and you're probably intimidated by teachers and you're probably intimidated by schools. I don't know everything, but I know a lot of black moms, and most of them are not intimidated by 23-year-old white women in our schools. They're not intimidated by that. There may be other issues that are going on. But I just think it just reminds us, it sort of takes us to the nexus of the problem. When you don't include people, and this is so key for our work in Justified Anger, what does the community want? What does it need? Let's organize it and set that agenda, and then bring our partners and allies around to help facilitate that. But when the facilitators move, when the agenda setters aren't in the room, it becomes problematic. Black parents have been saying for as long as I've been in this community, we need black teachers. Well, where are they? We need different curriculum. Well, where is it? And what's happening is we know how poverty, illness, homelessness, transition is impacting so many families. And unfortunately, they're all just sort of intersecting on the black family. So really, if you're looking at a child who's acting out, I'm wondering about home life. I don't just jump right to mental health issues. I'm not just going to just throw that kid on some meds. I want to find out what else is going on. Is the kid eating too much sugar? Is the kid raising its own siblings? Is the kid coming home being raised on television? Like, what are some of the what's happening to get this kid to this place? What's happening with parent life? Because a lot of that is just a kid acting out. Now, because there's this intersection of all of these isms and issues, and it hits the black community more than others, just like Alzheimer's does, and diabetes does, and hypertension. It's like they all just seem to catch the black community at this unique point. Our kids come to school thinking to be black. Your kids come to school thinking to be black means to be, and because they can't see poverty. They don't know that this child is sofa surfing. They don't know that this kid's mom might be working a couple of different jobs, or that this kid might be hungry. What they see is a black kid because the kid is black, but because they're not able to discern or understand these other systemic realities. So what we do is act like being black is the problem without attacking homelessness, underemployment, unemployment, depression that leads to drug use. We've got to approach the backstory if we want kids to come to school different. Because when my mom was growing up, all the black kids were poor, but they had a strong home life, and they knew if you go to school and act up, Mom is going to come right there too. My mother and I had a deal. We had an understanding. My mom didn't lie to me. She said, where you embarrass me is where I'm going to show up and embarrass you. So if it goes down in the mall, that's where it's going down. You decide to do it at church, guess what? So wherever you act up, I'm going to meet you right there, and we're going to deal with it. So you got to be able to strengthen parents and not just deduce that they're intimidated by the schools or they don't care. Are they overwhelmed? Are they depressed? What else is going on? Who's helping families navigate this community? I'm a Madisonian, and there are days I need help. I need a sponsor navigating Madison. When someone tells me that I'm not thoughtful enough, that I'm angry, that I'm a reverse racist, that I'm whatever, there are days I've got to just sort of do a head check in just so I can stay in the game. If you don't have the access, if someone mistreats me, I've got the chief of police on speed dial, the mayor on speed dial. I got the county executive on speed dial. I have things that I can do. I have a channel that I can follow. But when you don't have that and you feel that you're just at the whim of this community, that sense of hopelessness really holds people down. And so I'm enjoying this conversation. It's very sad and it's disheartening. It does mean that as a parent, you've got to be really conscientious. You've got to find athletic programs or just different ways to meet people who want to interact. Because I knew raising my daughter, my wife and I raising our daughter knew that she had to be able to be comfortable with African Americans, but folks weren't African Americans. So we took her in places where we knew she would build those cross-cultural relationships. She'd be comfortable being Black because of our home and our family. But I had to think about where are places where she can have really good, meaningful interaction with kids who didn't look like her. That's something that white parents didn't think about. They would just send their kids to school or send their kids to camp and just think, we don't talk about race, and so our kid is going to be, they're not going to think about race. They're not going to see it. And so parents have to have the talk, and you're having that. So, I really laud you for that, because that's not easy and that's not fun. And who wants to drop that on a 5-year-old? But the alternative is letting some kid on the playground talk about it, or teach your son words about other cultures that they shouldn't be learning. Because I remember kids learning those words and trying them out on the playground. So you've got to be you've got to be proactive in talking about this. But I think that in this community, white voices have got to speak up and say, Madison, get this disparity stuff together, because you're acting like it just hurts Black kids, and it's hurting all of our kids, because we're grooming kids from 5 years old who don't know how to interact with each other, and you all must fix this. You got to fix this in a hurry.
I'll find someone to tell that to, Alex.
You know what? I'm telling you, you start with your teacher, your kid's teacher. You start with the principal. You can get a letter to the superintendent. You can get a letter to the chief of schools, because people need to just be able to hear more about that. Because again, they expect me to come down and say, where are the Black teachers? Well, it's cold. Well, Black people don't want to come here and work. Black people have more degrees in education than any other discipline. So if they say we can't find Black engineers, and they exist, or Black oceanographers, though you can, I give it to them. But you cannot tell me you can't find Black teachers, because more than any other discipline, that's where we study. What's going on with the environment of the district or the community or the classrooms or the homes that makes this not attractive to folks? And the other thing, in our community, how do you take people who are really skilled but don't have teaching degrees who can be role models for kids? I don't have a degree in I don't have a teacher's degree or a license, but I can't teach leadership in the school. I cannot be a part-time teacher. I can't go in and teach Black history, even though I have a degree in Black history, because I'm not licensed to teach. So you have people with great skill who would love to interact with kids. I just read the other night like a pack of 50 letters from 4th and 5th graders from a local elementary school. I went out to speak at an assembly, and the majority of those kids were not Black. It was a very diverse group, but they're writing me thank you letters about coming out to them, because they don't see Black men teaching. They just like me for what I do in the community and wanting to serve. But the other thing that's very blaring, but somewhat not addressed or not spoken, was I happen to be Black also. So they're being mentored and taught by someone who looks like me. That benefited the whole student body, not just the Black students. And so people have got to be pushing and saying, all right, well, until you find better pipelines to our community, what are we going to do about the talented folks in this community who would love to be role models to all children in classrooms? What are we going to do to get emergency credentials to get some of these folks in our schools? Because our kids need to see those role models. And until that pressure comes from a broad base of tax-paying parents, I'm not sure if this is going to move fast enough. So I want to encourage you to really think about that, because there are options, and there's low-lying fruit and short-term solutions. But I think it has to do with some of the things I just mentioned that we've got to do to get other people of color in the schools, in the classrooms, and all parents have got to put pressure on our district to do a much better job of that. Well, I appreciate that question, and we've got to have places to have these discussions. I'm sure people who listen to and subscribe to our podcast can really relate. And part of my strategy in Black Like Me is that people get a chance to look at life and these issues through the lens of an African American male, but listening to me address this issue allows them to hear your perspective and mine, to think more clearly and hopefully more comprehensively about the issues. And hopefully someone who's listening is getting some ideas about what they can do in their communities to begin a better discussion about making education fair, accessible, and meaningful for all our kids, regardless of their ethnic background.
Well, let me just say one last thing, and I think just talking to you about it has been great. And I think what maybe struck me most when a 5-year-old asked me that question was that the answer that I would give is not great, and I'm like, the answer, one of the things that I wanted to say but didn't because I wasn't sure what to say about it, but I was like, yeah, like at your school, they don't do a very good job of this. And it highlights, it's something that I've talked with my 9-year-old about because he's older, but I was like, do I equip my 5-year-old with the truth that his school is failing many of their African-American students? Is that even true? Am I qualified to say that? I mean, and
you're
it's
a parent. You're very qualified to say that.
And it's like maybe I also didn't want to confront that truth myself.
Sure. And I don't think you start with your 5-year-old. I think you probably dropped enough truth on that kid. Go, let him go outside and run in a fire hydrant or something, play in the puddle. But you do say that to your administrators. You do say that to the school district. You do send off an email. You do post this because you have to say it to someone. Because up until now, Jeremy, the rhetoric has been, Madison is failing its black youth, its black children. And your response is, hell no, it's failing a whole lot more than that because I want to be talking to my kid at 5 years old about something that's easier than race, like long division or the solar systems or new math. You should be talking to your kid about some of those things and not about how the world treats black people, because as they tune into television and other places, they're going to see these kinds of things. So don't hold your tongue, but say it to someone who not only can handle it, they're paid to handle it. And this district works for you as well. And really, until we understand that this has a great impact on all of our children, we won't have the level of expediency. I respect our superintendent, so this is not a bash against that individual, but because we're talking about a much broader cause and people are listening to us from all across the country and the world, we've got to be able to talk. If you didn't like a meal, you talk to someone. If you bought bread at a co-op and it was moldy, you talk to the general manager. If you got poor service at a clinic, you talk to whoever's in charge. If your child's not being served well, you have to talk. You're the customer. You don't work for them. Those teachers and administrators work for you, and you got to act and talk like it. So take that white privilege up to that school and work that white.
I'll do that.
All right. Hey, Jeremy, it's been good talking with you. I hope to have you back in the studio again sometime.
Yeah. What do you do next Wednesday?
That's right. You're my engineer. You have to be here. Hey, Tyler Nylen's in the studio too. I don't want you to feel left out, Tyler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So this is the inaugural Work That White
first
piece.
one.
Yes, I want to make sure you're working that. So listen, let me just start off by asking you a question.
All right.
Then we'll get into something a little bit more serious.
Sounds good.
All right. Recently in the news, a man on his ATV fell through the ice into the lake here in Madison.
Okay.
He was out there like in 40-degree weather, like out in the middle of the lake. What are white people thinking?
I have no idea because that sounds absurd to me.
Let me tell you what black people said when they read that.
All right.
I know he wasn't a brother. I know black people were not out there on the ATV in the middle of the lake and it's 40 degrees out there.
See, I don't know. I just moved up here, so I've never seen this before either. I don't know if you just think all white people are the same or something like that. But
I just want you to listen. I always speak for black people, so I need you to explain white people to me. He put his ATV on the back of a truck. He drove to Lake Mendota. He backed that thing out on a lake and got on it.
Do you think he actually thought through all these things too?
Like if he was just like, he had to as he was driving this. I just don't know. I mean,
don't know.
Isn't there enough land to walk on? I mean, do you guys have to conquer the lakes too? Like what's up with that? What are white people thinking?
White people have to take over the water too.
They have to take over the water. Oh my gosh. Oh man. Okay, Tyler. Thanks for being a good sport. No. Seriously, I'm going to have Tyler on from time to time, as I mentioned. We work together in several capacities, but we're going to be talking from time to time about black-white relationships so that listeners get a peek into what cross-cultural work and relationships really can be. And part of the reason why I created this segment is I think cultural differences are funny. And I think we're so uptight that we're afraid to make, fun of things. And I don't mean demeaning people. I don't mean putting people down or calling them names, but when something like that happens, it's just funny. Black people just look at each other and just say, "I know he wasn't black." There's some other things I heard in the news. It could have been a brother, but I know. And if a brother was out there in the middle of the lake in ATV, He deserves it. Because what was he thinking? Good and well, if that ice is gonna crack, it's gonna crack under, brother. And so he shouldn't even be out. Shouldn't even be out there. So so Tyler, part of your work here in Madison, I mean, you moved here. You grew up in Rockford, Illinois.
Yeah, Rockford.
Correct. So you lived there your whole life.
Yeah, up until about 18.
Got you. So you did your undergrad in Ohio. Then you did your graduate work.
Yeah.
In Chicago.
Yeah.
Somewhere in your undergraduate degree, during that process, you really felt a sense that you wanted to work in a cross-cultural environment, particularly in a majority Black context.
And it's interesting too because it was the probably the whitest environment you could possibly be in. It was in the middle of nowhere. It's called Cedarville, Ohio, and it's just like in the middle of cornfields, and that's where I started to have that awakening actually. So.
Wow, that's so interesting. So you interned with us last summer. So you spent about 3 months here in Madison, and then on another segment we'll talk about how the relationship developed and what you're doing to actually to be here, because I think your story is really, really important. But what you can paraphrase this, but tell me what your professor, Dr. Ross, said to you, or to anyone who's white who feels a call to doing work cross-culturally and doesn't have a mentor who's Black or person of color. What did he say? What was the quote?
Yeah, so it was my first class ever in grad school, and it was an urban class, like urban and cross-cultural ministry class, and it was the first day, and he's just talking, and I'm like this little 22-year-old white kid sitting in the middle of what felt like titans of urban ministry around me. I mean, we had John Perkins' grandson in there. I mean, there was just people.
Sure.
And I was just in there, and he was talking, and he said this quote that he wrote in his book, The Next Evangelicalism, that said, if you are white and you are in this classroom and you have never had a non-white mentor, you are not a urban minister. You are a white colonialist.
Wow.
Which
he dropped that on y'all the first day?
The first day of class.
That's why I love that,
My
man.
first grad school class ever. I mean, I'm just, it totally just was a knife to the heart, because I walked into that class thinking I was down. I knew what I was up to already,
I took my urban ministry class.
I took an urban ministry class, and
I watched Color
Cedarville.
Purple.
Yeah, like I'd read a book or maybe two.
Wow.
So I know how things
and
work,
highlighted.
Right? Yeah, and I highlighted. Yeah, underlined even once in a while. So
all right.
Yeah, that's what white people will underline. So that was just a knife to the heart, because for as much as you think like, oh, this is something I'm passionate about, to recognize that you've never actually been influenced in a way like that by someone of color is
powerful insight. Yeah. Tyler, we're doing this segment because I've been really involved in our local community in trying to promote racial healing and really helping to bridge the chasm that separates the various groups, particularly the historic Black and white divide. But it's not only happening in my own community. This is a national phenomenon. People are addressing these issues, or wrestling with these issues.
Absolutely.
All over. But I found something out in some of my recent work in travel, and it's that I grew up assuming that my white counterparts and colleagues knew the ins and outs of history. Of course, everyone knows that there was slavery, but there's so many other systemic things that were built around that. I'm now finding out that my white colleagues did not learn the things I learned, do not know the things that I think that they knew. So I'm finding that people have not been distant and uncaring. Mm-hmm. They really have just been unlearned. I mean, they just didn't unaware. They just didn't know these things. And so part of our work is allowing our white allies, or would-be white allies, to listen into conversations, to hear how Blacks and whites are trying to strike up meaningful relationships. But it's just been very important to me, very, very healing for me, to realize that most people don't really know U.S. history. Yeah. And not that it lets people off the hook, but it's helpful to realize that people aren't just being apathetic and just saying, Alex, that's your history, and we don't care.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you think educational system-wise. I mean, I know my high school, college experiences. I mean, you take in history courses, and you really don't learn or aren't exposed to most of history. A lot of things that go. I mean, like for example, I literally had heard the name Malcolm X. I knew nothing about I didn't even know he was from Nation of Islam at all until I think I read his autobiography like this past summer or this past spring. So before that, I mean, I knew that there was a name, Malcolm X. No idea who he was at all. And so other than like hearing like, oh, stay away from him, like he's dangerous.
Right.
MLK is the good guy. Malcolm X is the bad guy. And when you read and you uncover history, like that's just completely false.
Sure.
Like those narratives, or even when you think of Black Panthers or anything like that. Those are the only things you really interact with in those historical senses. You don't hear that Black Panthers are actually providing breakfast for children who never, who didn't have the same provisions given or that anything.
Sure.
So,
they took to protecting the streets when Black men and women and children were given no protection.
Yeah.
Through law enforcement.
Yeah.
Against being shot or harassed. They decided to protect the streets, but they started off, you're right, in a program that looks very similar to some of the projects that are happening through Nehemiah or other well-meaning organizations. And so this brings us up to another point. So one of the things that we've undertaken through our Justified Anger work is to create a U.S. Black History class. Not just Black History, but a U.S. Black History class, where I've asked the instructors to give an overview of what was happening in America during slavery, during the pre-Atlantic slave trade. And we've asked them to explain how Black history played a role in what was happening in America and its economy and its politics and its elections. Yeah. And what we found is we've done this twice. So we're about to start our third course. But we have taken 400 white allies through this process. And by about the third or fourth session, people come to me and they say, I never learned this. I was a history major. I'm a history teacher. I didn't know this. And so one of the things we're doing is if we're going to move together with allies, we have to understand how we got here. Yeah. And not just that we woke up one day and people just made bad decisions. They just decided to go to prison or not finish school. Yeah. The ugliness of our history is not just that slavery happened, but that there were systemic realities that allowed slavery to work in a very unique way. Slavery is not new in the world, but American slavery was very new in how it's based upon race and ethnicity and all of those things. And so talk to me a little bit, because you'll be going through the class this year now that you live in Madison. Yeah. Just from your perspective, what's the importance of our white allies to really understand U.S. Black history? You know, is it to make people feel guilty or ashamed? What's the purpose? Why do you want to learn this, and how do you think that that'll help you in being a true ally, or what you and I tongue-in-cheek call working that white? Yeah. What's the role of learning history in your personal growth and involvement as an advocate in this community?
I mean, there's like so much to say about it. I think I can start with something that I read in James Baldwin recently.
You're reading James Baldwin?
I am. He is The Fire Next Time is what I'm reading right now. And he has this one quote where he talks about he's talking about white individuals, and he writes here that they are in effect still trapped in a history which they do not understand, and until they understand it, they cannot be released from it. And I think it points out the idea that white people in general are almost in their own way enslaved to this idea of who they are and what they are that they don't even recognize,
and what America is.
Yeah, and what America is that is so detrimental and harmful, but they don't understand it that way. And so, I mean, you losing your sense of identity in who you are, what your culture is. I mean, for me, and I haven't done much of this, but this is one of the steps that I think might be closer for me next is, uncovering more about what is my actual heritage. What makes me, in what ways maybe are there unaware things in my own life that I don't even recognize that tie into the fact that I'm one of my grandmas is 100% Polish, one of my grandmas is 100% Irish, that I've got a lot of German and Swedish in me. Like what about that helps to form me into me? And so going back and reclaiming like my own identities. Now, obviously that there's still some different ties there, but I think when it goes back to history in general, I mean, there's so much to learn that helps shape the way things are and why things are the way they are. And you can't know until you actually uncover that history. So you usually buy into some false narratives, or you'll keep perpetuating the same statements that don't actually have credence to them, or only have credence when you are interacting with your own sector.
Sure.
So,
I mean, you hit on something that's very important. The history class is not just an intellectual exercise. It's not just trying to make people sitting in the courses feel good about themselves or guilty. It's really about becoming aware. I mean, we're using tenured faculty from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It's a 9-week course. It's 2 hours. It's a 1-hour lecture. And then people break up in small groups. But it's really helping us to understand the mindset of founders of America, founding fathers. And again, it's not to demonize people. It's not so we can march and close down schools that are named after them. But what I really love about the process is it makes people who think that their mission is to rescue Black people to understand that they themselves must be rescued from something before they could even begin to think about participating in the liberating process.
And I think it's so important too, because it's not inaction. It's not just talk.
Yes.
I know that there's been, sometimes people think, well, let's just talk. Actually, it's one of the biggest pieces of action that we could have. I mean, how many other places in the country are doing intentional history classes, African-American classes? In the community for white people to help grow in their understanding and to actually sense empowerment then from there. Where not empowerment to, as this segment is called, work that white, not in a sense where you lord over your privilege or you live into your privilege in a sense that you do that, but you are actually able to take the spaces and places you have and create change and do that. So
sure, because one of the things that happens in intellectual towns like Madison is that we theorize these things and we listen to it, and then it's very easy for people to come up and say, Alex, I'm so sorry for history and what's happened to you, with no sense of responsibility about what they do with that knowledge and information. How do you challenge the boards that you're on? How do you ask questions of the HR department about hires? Where do you go intentionally to let your children or grandchildren interact with people who are different from them? There are so many things that people can do. So the history class lures people in to learn, but each time we challenge them to take a step. And again, you and I, tongue in cheek, refer to this as work that white, because I think that sometimes people don't want to understand privilege or white privilege because it has the connotation of responsibility with it. But unless people understand the privilege, they will never take on the responsibility. And these issues just really recycle themselves. It's someone else that's doing it, someone else that's done it. So the history class is really about empowering people to understand how we got to where we are today, but also what steps our allies need to take if they really want to be allies. If you just want to be a student taking a class on Monday nights, just so that you can learn new books to read, you can become that. But to really help to strengthen and transform our Madison, to move away from some of the from the stigma that we've received by having such horrible disparity. We're gonna need everyone to take action on what they hear, and not just African American people.
And I think it really unleashes another part too of empowerment to help people work that white, in the sense that they start seeing their fight against racism as not just, am I going to tutor kids, or am I going to show up and feed people, when those aren't even like the main issues. The main issues are you going to go into your current job that you are already in, that you're in place for, and are you going to advocate? Are you going to change systems of whiteness? Are you going to recognize when people are being discriminated against, or when it's clear that you're in a meeting and 3 white people are shutting down someone who's Black who has a different perspective and bringing something else, and it's systems of whiteness taking place over there. So, or
ask the Black person to only speak about Black and cultural issues, and not issues of marketing or law, whatever's pertinent.
So when you're thinking about throwing a party, and then everyone's got a certain perspective, but I don't know.
No, that's good. That's good. So Tyler, I hope to have you back on the show in the future, because I really would like to continue to get your perspective, and even have other guests coming on talking about steps that they're taking. One of the things I found about my white allies is that they don't want to necessarily, the people who want to talk about what they're doing are probably not necessarily doing that much. But the people who don't are doing some really good work, but they don't want to sound like they're the white messiah. So you and I need to find some folks who are taking some good strides and doing things that's very empowering and doing it the right way, so that people who are listening to this podcast will begin to think, I could do that in my community. I didn't think that was significant. that's not that difficult. I can do it because I understand this is an opportunity for me to do more than talk about this or think about it, but do something.
Yeah.
So I really hope that you and I can talk more in the future about steps you're taking, but also to offer a constant call to action for our would-be white allies who want to know, how do I become a part of the solution?
Yeah. And I do think, too, that's an important point, too, because you may not even notice, but I actually was kind of hesitant to want to even do this, just because of
really, why?
Well, what you just said there. I'd rather not come across as someone who's on here telling white people how to be better at being white allies, because I still notice so many ways in which I fail all the time. You know just as much of anyone. And so, yeah, it's it is a place where you don't really want to be like, hi, I know what I'm up to, and I that. So
definitely. So we'll make sure we talk about your flat sides too. We get back together.
Well, and it's nice to be invited into that space then, to know that that's there. So.
I appreciate it. I look forward to having you back on some more. You have been listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Thank you so much for your support, and keep listening and telling others about it.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.